The wind knifed through Manhattan like it meant to punish. Gray clouds bunched along the skyline, heavy with snow not yet fallen. In the glass fortress that towered above Central Park, Nathaniel Mercer stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored charcoal suit. His reflection stared back at him, sharp jaw, eyes like smoke, expression carved from stone. His assistant hovered behind him, hesitant. "Mr. Mercer, the car is waiting. You have the meeting with the senator at 6. "I'll reschedule." His voice was clipped, unbothered. "Have Harrison send something reassuring." "Yes, sir." He didn't watch her leave. Nathaniel preferred not to look too long at anyone anymore. Eyes made people think you were open, that you might care. The truth was he didn't, not since his mother died in the hospital bed he bought her, in the wing he built and named after her. Not since his father left a scalding trail of debt and betrayal. Not since his fiancée, young, golden, brilliant, walked out 2 weeks before their wedding, leaving behind a single sentence: "You don't know how to love." Maybe he didn't, maybe he never did. So he built, he conquered, he destroyed competitors like it was a game, and slowly people stopped expecting warmth from him. He liked it that way. But life has a way of piercing even the coldest skin when it wants to. 3 miles away, in a brightly lit corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and too many long nights, Elise Marlowe adjusted the IV drip for room 502, tucked a corner of a blanket back around the shoulders of a sleeping elderly man, and gave the chart one last glance before moving on. Her feet ached, her scrubs were slightly damp from an accidental spill during rounds, and she hadn't had more than coffee and a granola bar since 9 a.m. Still, she smiled as she walked. Elise wasn't sure when she'd become the kind of person who found meaning in exhaustion, but she was. After losing her younger brother 2 years ago to a seizure no one saw coming, and then watching her mother crumble under the weight of that grief, nursing had become more than a job. It was her way back to the world. Each patient she cared for, each worried relative she comforted, it felt like stitching something together inside herself again. She was heading to the nurse's station when the head nurse called out. "Elise, can you take room 709, emergency admit, private wing, VIP client, we need someone who won't bat an eye." That caught her attention, VIP. The woman grimaced, billionaire type, cold, demanding, already told 2 nurses to get out. "We're not losing this contract. They're saying one of the biggest donors to the hospital board sent him here personally." Elise grabbed the tablet with the patient's intake notes and skimmed it. Severe abdominal pain, possible appendicitis ruled out, dehydration, fatigue. The notes were vague, but the bottom line was the man was important, or at least powerful. "On it," she said, not yet knowing the name on the chart would change everything. When she entered the room, Nathaniel Mercer looked like a lion penned in the wrong zoo. His suit jacket hung off the chair beside the bed, and he sat rigid against the pillows, arms crossed, glaring at the television. A faint sheen of sweat lined his brow. "I already told them I don't need babysitting," he snapped before even looking at her. Elise didn't flinch. "Good thing I'm not a babysitter, I'm Elise, night nurse." He looked at her then, really looked. No flashy makeup, no fear in her posture, a calm, steady gaze that didn't fawn or flinch. She was ordinary, but in a way that felt solid, real. "I want to go home," he said, voice low. "I read the chart, you collapsed in your office. 2 staff members had to carry you into the elevator. You're dehydrated, your blood pressure is unstable, and your assistant said you've skipped meals for 3 days. Home's a bad idea." His mouth twitched like he might argue, but he didn't. She moved closer, checking his vitals with quiet efficiency. "Do you usually wait until your body revolts to slow down?" she asked as she took his pulse. He blinked. "Excuse me." "Your heart's racing, that could be stress, or stubbornness." "You think I'm stubborn." "I think you need rest, and maybe someone who doesn't care how many buildings have your name on them." He gave a hollow laugh, then winced at a flash of pain in his side. "Charming." "Drink this." She handed him a glass of water and held his gaze until he took it. "You don't have to like me, Mr. Mercer, but for tonight you're my responsibility, so let's just start there." No one had spoken to him like that in years, not without motive, not without calculation. He took a sip, and for reasons he didn't understand, didn't say another word. The hours ticked on, snow began to fall. Elise came and went, checking on him with quiet, calm consistency. She didn't pry, didn't flatter, didn't treat him like anything but a man who needed care. And somewhere between one round and the next, he found himself watching the door, waiting for the sound of her steps. She returned just after midnight, carrying a small bottle of electrolyte drink. "You're still awake?" she asked, surprised. "Couldn't sleep." Thinking about stock prices. He gave a faint smile, no. She sat in the chair beside the bed and handed him the drink. I'm not off duty for another hour. You want to talk about it? Do you always ask your patients that? Only the ones who look like they've forgotten what kindness feels like. He stared at her for a long beat. Her expression didn't shift. No pity, just patience and presence. He spoke before he could stop himself. I built everything I have because I thought if I made enough noise, I wouldn't have to feel what I'd lost. She didn't say anything right away, just leaned back slightly, giving him space but not stepping away. I know that feeling, she said softly. After my brother died, I tried to be busy enough to outrun the grief. Didn't work. He looked at her, something stirring beneath the surface of his careful mask. How do you live with it? He asked. You don't, she said. You carry it, but if you're lucky, you meet people who help make the weight a little lighter. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. He looked down at the bottle in his hands. Thank you, Elise. For the drink. For saying me. She smiled. Get some rest, Mr. Mercer. You've got a long way to go, but you're not alone tonight. He watched her leave, the echo of her words anchoring something inside him. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Mercer fell asleep not to the sound of his own restless thoughts, but to the memory of her voice. Nathaniel woke to muted light filtering through the window, the city hushed under a fresh sheet of snow. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. The sterile white ceiling, the steady beep of machines, the strange softness of his pillow, it felt foreign. So did the lingering calm in his chest. Then her voice from memory, you've got a long way to go, but you're not alone tonight. He sat up slowly, surprised at the dull ache in his body, not just physical, something deeper like the first thaw after a long freeze. He glanced at the chair beside his bed, now empty. No sign of Elise. Of course not, she'd been the night nurse, temporary. Still, he felt her absence like a hollow space where something warm had just been. Elise was on her third round of the morning when her supervisor stopped her at the coffee station. You made an impression, the woman said, sliding her a folded note. Room 709. Elise frowned. The paper was expensive, heavyweight. The handwriting was clean and angular. Thank you for the dignity. N. Mercer. That was it. No demands, no money, no posturing. Just a note. She tucked it into her scrub pocket and said nothing. By the following week, the patient in room 709 had been discharged. Elise found herself thinking about him at odd moments, in the lull between emergencies, while folding warm towels for a new mother, while wrapping a dressing around a teenage boy's fractured wrist. She thought of the way he'd said her name, not casually, like it surprised him every time. But life inside a hospital had its own gravity. One patient left, 5 more arrived. Time didn't pause for curiosity. Until he came back. Not as a patient. As a man who walked into the nurse's station with a coat dusted in snow and eyes fixed on her like she was the only person in the room. I need to speak with Nurse Elise Marlowe, he said. She looked up from her clipboard and blinked. Mr. Mercer. He wore no tie today, his coat unbuttoned, scarf loose. There were creases under his eyes, honest ones, like he hadn't been sleeping well, or maybe like he'd stopped pretending he didn't need rest. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, softer now. I wanted to thank you in person and properly. One of the interns nearly dropped a tray behind them. Elise ignored it. You already did, she said, the note. I owe you more than a note. She hesitated. I was just doing my job. His eyes didn't waver. You saw me when I didn't want to be seen. That's not a job, that's a gift. She should have laughed it off, told him to get some rest. Instead, she found herself asking, what is it you want from me, Mr. Mercer? A long pause. I don't know yet, he said, but I'd like to start with coffee. The cafe was small and quiet, tucked behind the hospital's east wing. Not many staff came here, 2 out of the way, which suited them. Elise stirred honey into her tea while he studied her like she was a blueprint he couldn't crack. I was raised to believe vulnerability was weakness, he said. My father didn't believe in softness, my mother did. She tried to raise me differently, but the world she lived in didn't reward that. Elise met his gaze, and you think the world does now. No, but I'm tired of pretending I don't need anyone. She looked down at her cup, the steam fogged her lashes. That's not something people admit lightly. I know. He was quiet a moment. You were kind to me, not because I could offer you anything, but because I needed it. She nodded. I try to treat people like they matter, even when they forget that they do. A silence settled between them, not awkward, not charged, just honest. Then she asked, why now? I don't want to forget what it felt like, he said, eyes steady, to be seen with no agenda, no angle. She watched him for a moment, the way his fingers curled lightly around his coffee cup like he wasn't used to small comforts. I don't date patients, she said. I'm not your patient anymore. She smiled faintly. You might still be recovering. His mouth curved. Then maybe we can both start slow. Their first real evening together wasn't a date. Not exactly. Elise invited him to a volunteer fundraiser the hospital hosted for low-income families in recovery, an event full of folding chairs and home-cooked casseroles and a raffle table with donated gift baskets. Nathaniel stuck out like a sore thumb in his dark overcoat and sharp lines, but he didn't complain. He stood beside her while she handed out gloves to kids whose fingers were already red from cold. He helped tape up signs that kept falling. He wrote a check to the foundation without telling anyone. And when a little girl tripped near the snack table, he was the first to kneel beside her, offering his expensive silk handkerchief to wipe her scraped chin. Later, Elise found him alone beside a table of mismatched cookies. She okay? She asked. He nodded. She told me I looked like a prince from a cartoon. Were you flattered? He smiled. I was floored. Elise leaned beside him, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't pull away. You're different outside the boardroom, she said. I'm not sure I ever knew who I was inside it. She tilted her head, and now. I think I'm learning. Their eyes met. He wasn't smooth about it. He didn't lean in like a man who always gets what he wants. He just looked at her and the question was there, unspoken, fragile. She didn't kiss him, but she didn't step back either. And for Nathaniel, that small closeness felt more powerful than any seduction. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real and rare. He began to call her in the evenings, sometimes just to ask about her day. She told him stories from the hospital, funny, bittersweet, strange. He listened like no one else ever had. In turn, she asked about his company, his buildings, his long nights spent in suites where no one knew his name. She didn't pretend to understand that world, but she never once made him feel ashamed for needing more than it had ever given him. And slowly, the man the world called cold began to change. Not loudly, quietly, like snow melting under spring light. He stopped canceling meetings just to prove his power. He started attending the hospital board gatherings he once sent lawyers to instead. He asked questions about patient care, about community outreach. And always, always, he looked for her in the crowd. She never acted impressed. But sometimes, when he caught her watching him with that still, steady gaze, he wondered if maybe she saw something in him worth becoming. One evening she invited him to her apartment. It was modest, a second-floor walk-up in Queens. Plants lined the windowsill, there were books on every surface, and a photo of a boy on the fridge with a crooked smile and the same eyes as Elise. He looked at it for a long moment. My brother, she said quietly, Jeremy. I'm sorry. I used to talk to him like he was still in the room, after he passed, just so I wouldn't forget how his voice sounded. Nathaniel reached for her hand, not out of pity, out of shared understanding. I still talk to my mother sometimes, he said, usually late at night, when I feel like the man she raised would be ashamed of the man I became. She turned to him then, eyes shining with something both fierce and gentle. She wouldn't be, Elise whispered, not anymore. And this time it was her who reached up and kissed him, soft, slow, the kind of kiss that speaks of something healing instead of wanting. He pulled her close, his forehead against hers, breath catching in a way that felt like coming home. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. What was growing between them didn't need to be named yet. But it was there, alive and warm in the quiet. And for the first time in a long, long time, Nathaniel Mercer felt like a man worth loving. Nathaniel stood by the window in Elise's apartment, the skyline faint and dreamy beyond the frost-speckled glass. He held a chipped ceramic mug she'd handed him earlier, the steam curling into the stillness of early morning. The place smelled of coffee and something floral, lavender maybe. Peace lived here. It was in the quiet hum of the radiator, the soft creak of wood floors under bare feet, the way she had let her head rest on his shoulder last night without needing to speak. He hadn't slept beside someone in years, not like that, not without expectation, not without the armor. He turned to look at her. Elise stood at the stove in an oversized sweater and thick socks, humming under her breath while flipping scrambled eggs with one hand and holding her phone in the other. "Hospital called," he asked. She nodded. "There's been a flu outbreak. Pediatrics is short-staffed. They asked if I could come in for the afternoon shift." "You're going to say yes." "I always say yes." "You're allowed to rest too, you know." She glanced over her shoulder, a quiet smile in her eyes. Says the man who nearly passed out in his office 2 weeks ago. "Touché." She plated the eggs and sat beside him at the tiny kitchen table, sliding one plate across. "This is nice," he said, almost surprised. "Just this." "It is." He traced the rim of his cup with his thumb. "I've been thinking." "That sounds dangerous." He smiled. "I want to do something with all of it. The company, the money, not just slap my name on buildings or throw checks at problems from a distance." She watched him carefully. "What are you thinking?" "A foundation, maybe start with funding medical programs, outreach clinics, equipment upgrades for underfunded hospitals, scholarships for nurses." Her fork paused midair. "Scholarships. You said something the night we met about people helping carry the weight. I want to be one of those people now." Elise set her fork down. "That's not just a thought, that's a shift." "Being near you shifts things." The room went quiet, a deep, full silence. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "You mean it." "I do." She nodded. "Then let's talk about how we make it happen." They started small. A pilot program launched in a hospital in the Bronx, funding free mental health resources for overworked nurses. Elise consulted on the logistics, bringing in real stories from the floor, while Nathaniel navigated the paperwork and board approvals. Together, they built something practical and quietly powerful. Their days began to blur. Between her long shifts and his board meetings, there wasn't much room for grand gestures, but their love, if that's what it was becoming, wasn't made of grandness, it was small moments. A sandwich dropped off on a particularly bad day, a hand squeezed under the table during a tense meeting. The way he kept a photo of her brother on his desk now, next to a framed blueprint of the new wellness wing they were planning. And then came the gala. Nathaniel hadn't wanted to go, but it was for the foundation, their foundation. He'd bought the suit, hired the catering, given his name to the event, but none of it mattered until he saw Elise step through the lobby doors in a midnight blue dress and simple silver earrings, her hair twisted back to show the curve of her neck. He walked over without thinking. "You look," he began. "Exhausted," she teased. "Stunning." Her smile faltered just slightly. "I feel a bit out of place." "You're the reason we're here tonight." She looked around, the donors, the press, the polished faces. "You're the one they came to see." "I'm the one they expect," he corrected gently, "but you're the one they need to hear." "I'm not good with microphones." "I'll be beside you." She didn't argue. When they stepped up to the podium, the room went still. Nathaniel began with practiced ease, speaking of corporate responsibility and long-term investment in public health. But after a few minutes, he turned to Elise. "She's the heart behind all of this," he said, "and if you truly want to understand what we're trying to build, you need to hear her story." She froze for a heartbeat, then stepped forward. "My brother died when he was 16, she said, voice soft but steady. "We didn't have a great hospital nearby. He might have made it if we had. I became a nurse because I couldn't save him. But I've learned that sometimes healing doesn't look like miracles. Sometimes it's just having enough beds, enough nurses, a listening ear at the right time." Her voice broke just slightly, but she didn't stop. "We built this foundation not because we want to be seen, but because we know what it means to be unseen, and we want to change that." The applause was quiet at first, then it swelled. Nathaniel didn't look at the crowd, he looked at her. Later, on the balcony above the ballroom, Elise stood with her heels kicked off and her hands wrapped around a mug of cider. Nathaniel joined her, shrugging out of his jacket and draping it over her shoulders without a word. "You were brilliant," he murmured. "I was terrified." "Still brilliant." She looked up at him, something tender and unspoken in her eyes. "Why me?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you saw me before I remembered how to see myself." Her breath caught. "I don't know where this is going, us." "I don't either. But I'm not walking away." He reached for her hand. "Then we'll figure it out, one step at a time." Her fingers laced with his. And somewhere between the cold of the city and the warmth of his jacket around her shoulders, Elise felt something settle inside her. Not certainty, not perfection, but a beginning. The holidays came fast and rough. A storm flooded parts of the city, putting pressure on the hospital. Elise worked double shifts. Nathaniel spent days on the phone coordinating emergency grants. They barely saw each other. When they did, they fought, quietly but honestly, about time, about needs, about the impossible task of holding space for a relationship between two people who gave too much of themselves away. One night she came home to find him asleep on her couch, a half-written apology note in his lap and takeout containers stacked neatly on the counter. She curled up beside him without waking him, no anger left, just weariness and love. Because yes, it was love now. Not the sweeping, perfect kind, but the kind that grows through work, through weathering. In early spring, Elise's mother fell ill, a lung infection, complications. Elise spent 5 nights in her hospital room, barely sleeping. Nathaniel visited every day, bringing soup, books, quiet reassurances. On the 6th day, he walked in with a portable record player and one of her mother's favorite jazz albums. He played it quietly in the corner, while Elise slept with her head on the edge of the hospital bed. She woke to her mother smiling faintly, eyes wet with tears. "You found someone who makes you feel safe," her mother whispered. Elise nodded, heart aching. "I did, and she had." Not because he was powerful, but because he had learned slowly, painfully, to be soft. With her for her. And she in turn had learned that the coldest hearts could be warmed, not by force but by grace. Nathaniel never used to pray, not after his mother died, not after his father betrayed everything their name stood for. But there was something about the stillness of a hospital hallway at 3 in the morning that turned silence into something sacred. He sat outside Elise's mother's room, elbows on his knees, hands steepled under his chin. Down the corridor, a janitor mopped slowly. A vending machine buzzed in the background. The quiet hum of machines in each room carried on like a lullaby for the weary. He thought about Elise, curled beside her mother just a few feet away, her face drawn with exhaustion but her fingers laced gently through her mother. She hadn't left the room in 2 days. She'd barely eaten. Nathaniel had tried to get her to take breaks, but she just shook her head and said, "I'm right where I need to be." And he knew that feeling now. Because wherever she was, that's where he needed to be too. He wasn't used to helplessness. He was used to solving, fixing, acquiring, negotiating. But no deal he'd ever made could give Elise the thing she wanted most, more time with her mother. So he waited, he stayed. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not leave. 2 days later, her mother began to recover, slow but steady. The color came back to her cheeks and the infection finally began to recede. Elise exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. When they were alone, she turned to Nathaniel, her voice quiet. "I know what it costs you to wait, to do nothing." He touched her cheek with the back of his hand. "It's not nothing, not when it's for you." She leaned into him then, not with drama or urgency, but with quiet relief. "You don't have to be everything all the time," he said softly. "You're allowed to lean too." She buried her face in his shoulder and let herself rest there. And something inside her, something always braced for loss, finally began to loosen. Spring brought light, the kind that made windows glow and sidewalks bloom with purple crocuses, the kind that whispered maybe. Elise returned to work part-time while her mother continued outpatient care. Nathaniel adjusted his travel schedule without being asked. They moved through their days separately but tethered, little texts, late-night calls, coffee left on the other's doorstep when their paths couldn't cross. They were learning to love each other in pieces. One night, as the city shimmered in post-rain quiet, they walked through Central Park, shoes muddy, hands entwined. "Do you ever think about what it would have looked like," Elise asked, "if we'd met before the grief?" He considered that. "I might have been too arrogant. You might have thought I was a lost cause." She laughed. "You were definitely a lost cause." He glanced at her sideways, and yet here we are. "I like us better this way," she said. "We're not shiny, we've been through things, we see each other clearer." He stopped walking and pulled her closer, thumb brushing the curve of her jaw. "I see you," he said, "and I still forget how to breathe sometimes." She didn't say anything back. She just kissed him, the kind of kiss that said yes, not to the moment, but to everything it had taken to arrive here. In late May, the first nurse scholarship launched. Nathaniel gave a quiet speech at the press conference, his voice measured and full of sincerity. But when Elise stepped to the podium and introduced the recipient, a single father of three trying to finish his RN degree, the whole room stood to applaud. Afterward, Nathaniel found her in the corridor, standing alone near the vending machines, her hands still trembling from the spotlight. "You were incredible," he said. "I was terrified. You didn't show it." She looked up at him, vulnerable and proud. "I've never stood in front of that many people. You made them listen, not because you were loud, but because you were honest." She reached for his hand. "I couldn't have done this without you." His voice was quiet. "You were already doing it, I just found a way to walk beside you." Then, after a breath, he added, "There's something I've been working on, something else I haven't told you yet." She tilted her head. "What kind of something?" "A surprise, not the grand kind, just personal." Her brow arched. "I don't do well with secrets." "I promise it's a good one." The surprise came a week later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Nathaniel drove her to a neighborhood she didn't recognize, brownstone-lined, full of kids on scooters and neighbors trading garden clippings over iron fences. He parked in front of a corner lot where the house had a wraparound porch and a massive oak tree in the yard. Elise looked at him. "Whose place is this?" "Ours," he said softly, "if you want it." She blinked. "Nathaniel." "It's not a mansion, it's not about square footage, it's about quiet roots. We've both lived too long in places that never felt safe. I want to build one with you." She walked up the porch steps slowly, trailing her fingers along the railing. Inside, it smelled of fresh paint and sunlight. There were boxes still unopened, a few paint swatches taped to the wall, and in the kitchen, framed and already hung, was the photo of her brother. She turned, eyes wide. He stood in the doorway, watching her carefully. "I wanted it to feel like you, like home." She didn't rush into his arms. She stood still, breath catching, and let the truth of it settle. Then she walked toward him slowly, until her hand found his chest. "I don't need the house," she whispered, "but I want the life." "Then let's build it." And they did. Not without challenge, not without pain. But with grace, with forgiveness, with the kind of love that grows not in the grand but in the quiet daily choice to stay. Weeks later, Nathaniel returned to the hospital, not as a patient but as a mentor. He'd been asked to speak to new staff about leadership in high-pressure roles. He wore no tie, he brought Elise with him. And when the young nurses asked how someone like him, stone-faced, steel-spined, once infamous for firing a man who blinked too slow, had come to fund a wellness wing and scholarship program for people most of the world overlooked, he told the truth. "I collapsed in my office one day," he said. "I was alone, miserable, but someone sat beside me who didn't care about my bank account. She cared about whether I'd eaten, whether I'd slept. She cared about the man I'd forgotten I was." His voice thickened just slightly. "She taught me how to be soft again, and then she showed me how strength lives there too." At the end of the session, one nurse raised her hand. "Is it true," she asked, "that you two fell in love right there in the hospital?" Nathaniel smiled and Elise took his hand. "Not all at once," she said, "but piece by piece, in all the moments we didn't see coming." The air was warm, heavy with the scent of late summer. Cicadas buzzed in the tall grass behind the house, and the kitchen window was cracked open just enough to let in a breeze that stirred the white curtains. Nathaniel stood barefoot at the counter, sleeves rolled, a wooden spoon in one hand and a recipe printout in the other. Flour dusted his forearm, and a smudge of something tomato red clung to his collarbone. He'd never cooked before Elise, not really. He used to rely on catered meals, plated like art and gone in 3 bites. Tonight, the sauce simmering on the stove was too thick and the pasta might have been overcooked, but he didn't care. He was making dinner for the woman he loved. In the background, the record player spun softly, jazz humming low. A different kind of rhythm had entered his life now, not dictated by quarterly returns or the next acquisition, but by the way Elise's eyes lit up when she danced barefoot in the living room or how she curled into his side when reading before bed. The front door opened and closed gently, her footsteps padded across the wood floors. "I smell something delicious," she called. He turned. "Don't get your hopes too high. I may have underestimated how much garlic qualifies as a clove." She laughed, setting down her bag and shrugging off her lightweight cardigan. Her cheeks were flushed from the walk, her hair pulled up in that casual way he'd come to love. She came to him, winding her arms around his waist as he wiped his hands on a towel. "I don't care what it tastes like," she murmured into his chest. It smells like home. He kissed the top of her head. That's the goal. They ate at the small kitchen table with mismatched chairs and a single flickering candle between them. Elise talked about her day, the new nurse intern who reminded her of herself years ago, the patient who refused pain medication but accepted 3 extra pudding cups with a wink. Nathaniel listened, quietly fascinated by her ability to find light in the hardest moments. After dinner, they lingered, neither in a rush, the kind of slowness that came when you stopped counting time. He watched her, chin resting on his hand, until she noticed. "What?" "I was thinking," he said, reaching for her hand, "about the day we met. You walked into that room like you had no idea who I was, or maybe you did and didn't care." "I cared," she said, "just not in the way you were used to. That's what saved me." She studied him a long moment. "You saved yourself. I just refused to let you lie to me about who you really were." His voice dropped. "And who's that?" "A man who's learning how to love without keeping score." He stood then, pulling her with him, and they moved to the living room where the evening light painted golden lines across the hardwood. He pressed play on the record again, that same soft jazz, the one he'd once played beside her mother's hospital bed. "Dance with me," he said. She didn't hesitate. They moved slowly, her cheek against his chest, his hand at the small of her back, the music threading around them like warmth. Nothing choreographed, nothing for show. Just two people who had come through the worst of themselves and still chosen one another. As the music faded, he tilted her chin up gently. "I've been thinking about the future." She smirked, dangerous words from a man who used to plan every minute. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, not velvet, not flashy, just something simple, honest. Elise stared at it, breath-catching. He didn't drop to one knee, he didn't make a speech. He opened the box and held it between them. "I don't need a wedding or a ceremony, I don't care how or when. I just want a life with you, every messy, beautiful, ordinary day of it." Her eyes filled, but her voice was steady. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had always belonged. They stood in silence, wrapped in one another, the city distant and unimportant, the world suddenly very small and full. Later that year, the first brick was laid for the new community health center they funded together. It bore no names carved in stone, no flashy ribbon-cutting ceremony, just a plaque in the lobby that read, "Built for the ones we couldn't save, built to save the ones we still can." Nathaniel stepped back, reading the words again, hand resting lightly at the small of Elise's back. Around them, construction hummed. Volunteers unloaded boxes of supplies. A nurse unwrapped a box of fresh bandages while a child peeked curiously inside the building. Elise turned to him. "We're really doing this." He nodded, "And we're just getting started." Behind the wear of long weeks and tired nights, there was something in both their eyes that hadn't been there before. Joy. Not the kind that comes with fireworks or fairy tales. The kind that comes from surviving something hard, choosing softness anyway, and finding a hand that stays when the crowd fades. They left the site as the sun dipped low, painting gold across the scaffolding. Nathaniel opened the passenger door for her and paused, just watching her for a moment. "What?" she asked, laughing. "I used to think love was a luxury I couldn't afford. And now I know it's the only thing that ever really mattered." He closed the door gently behind her, walked around the car, and got in. They drove home in silence, fingers intertwined over the gear shift. Two lives once fractured, now whole. Together.